welcome to Metis IAS. So in this video, we will be discussing about the approach that is required for polity part in the general studies paper 2 of the UPSC civil services examinations. Okay. That is mainly we will be discussing about the polity part for the mains examination of the UPSC civil services. Right. Now, before we start with the polity part, it is important for us to understand certain things about the mains examination. Now, when I say it is important to understand certain things about the mains examination, everybody must keep certain things in mind that the UPSC mains examination has in total 9 papers. Now, when I say 9 papers, 7 papers in this will be counted in your final marks, and 2 papers are just qualifying in nature. Now, what are these 2 papers? These are nothing but the language paper that you write in your mains examination. Now, what are these language papers? Very simple. One will be English, which has to be mandatorily selected or mandatorily written by all the aspirants. And another language will be any Indian language that you want to choose. So you can choose Kannada, you can choose Hindi, you can choose Tamil, you can choose Telugu, etc. Any of the language that you wish to choose can be opted by. So these are the 2 papers which are qualifying in nature. Now let us come to the remaining 7 papers. Now what are these remaining 7 papers? These remaining 7 papers, each of these remaining papers will be carried 250 marks each for your mains examination. What are these 7 papers? You have essay, you have 4 general studies, and you have 1 optional subject whose 2 papers will have to be written in the mains examination. Now, coming to the essay paper, this essay paper will be for 250 marks. There will be 8 essays in total, 4 in part A, 4 in part B. Out of which you will have to choose 1 essay from part A and 1 essay from part B for 125 marks each. So this will comprise your essay for 250 marks. Now you have 4 general studies paper. Now what are these 4 general studies paper? General studies paper 1, general studies paper 2, general studies paper 3, and general studies paper 4. Now, all these general studies papers, that is GS 1, 2, 3, and 4, will be for 250 marks each. So, it is 250 plus 250 into 4, that is 1250. Now, what are the remaining 2 papers? As I told, it is 1 optional subject, out of which you will have to choose 2, you will have to write 2 papers. For example, if you choose political science as an optional subject, then there will be paper 1 and paper 2 of political science and international relations. Both these papers will be for 250 marks each. So 1250 plus 250 into 2, that is 1750 marks will be for your mains. Now, now when I say general studies paper 2, there are 4 different subjects that are forming the part of this general studies paper. So what are these 4 different subjects? Subject number 1, polity and constitution. Subject number 2, governance. Subject number 3, social justice. And subject number 4 is international relations. Now, let us try to understand in brief about these 4 subjects. Coming to polity and constitution, so we understand that we have a rule book called as Indian Constitution. Now, based on this Indian Constitution, our political system is running. This is what we call as polity. So, what do we study in this subject? We study the historical underpinnings of our Indian Constitution. For example, the roots of our Constitution goes back to the Regulating Act of 1773, and it goes on and on and on till the 1935 Government of India Act. So all these provisions from 1773 to 1935 has played an important role in shaping our constitution. And not just that, we also study the salient features of our constitution, like the fundamental rights, like the fundamental duties, like the directive principles of the state policies, etc. And not just that, we also study the pillar of our polity, that is the parliament, the judiciary, the state legislatures, and the panchayats and municipalities. how do they work, what are the effectiveness of their working, what are the challenges in their working, and how we can bring certain reforms in their working. So these are the things that we study in the significant provisions. And not just that, we also study the important constitutional bodies that are present in our constitution. For example, in the present days, the center of attraction is the Election Commission of India. So we study the functioning of Election Commission of India, the powers and responsibilities that are given to the Election Commission of India, the challenges or the shortcomings that are prevalent within the functioning of Election Commission of India, and what are the certain reform measures that has been suggested with respect to the Election Commission of India. So this comprises of our polity and constitution. Next, we move on to a subject called as governance. Now, in simple words, what is this governance? Governance is nothing but the day-to-day administration about how the state is run. Now, when I say the day-to-day administration, for the day-to-day administration, there has to be certain government policies. There has to be certain ways by which the government is initiating the development of the state. And as we know, in the present times, we are living in a digital world. Then there has to be something called as e-governance. All these things we study in governance. And not just that, apart from state, there are certain non-state actors who also play a very important role in the administration or in the developmental aspects. Now, who are these? For example, the non-governmental organizations, the self-help groups. So we also study their importance, their roles, their functions, their challenges in the day-to-day administration of our state. So these are the things that we study in governance. Next, we have a subject called as social justice. Now, what is a social justice? In simple words, it is nothing but upliftment of the poor and the vulnerable sections of the society. Or in other words, it is nothing but giving voice to the voiceless and giving power to the powerless. Now, how are we going to deal with this? Very simple, overcoming or ensuring that the marginalized sections are overcome out of their poverty or out of their hunger, and ensuring that health, education, and their human resource development is well within the ambits of our constitution, and steps are taken by the state to ensure that and to protect their vulnerability. So this is what we call as social justice. Next, we have a subject called as international relations. What is this international relations? In simple words, it is nothing but India's relationship with other countries. Now, when I say other countries, this can be divided into India's immediate neighborhood. For example, the countries with whom India shares a land and maritime border. Next, there is something called as extended neighborhood. For example, the regions like Southeast Asia, West Asia, Central Asia, etc. And also, we have something called as outside world. For example, with the countries like US or even with respect to the European Union. So we study or we explore India's foreign policy with all these countries. For example, in the 1950s, we had something called as Panchashila. Then in the 1990s, we had something called as Gujarat Doctrine. And now we are in the era of neighborhood first policy. So all these things we study in the international relations. And not just that. For example, recently there are issues like the Russia-Ukraine crisis that is going on, the fear of the Trump tariffs that are going on. So we study its implications on India with respect to geopolitical aspects, geoeconomic aspects, as well as geostrategic aspects. Then we also hear about a lot of international institutions like the United Nations, the World Bank, the WHO, etc. So we study their functioning in this international relations. And not just that, there are also certain bilateral as well as plurilateral, or we can also call as minilateral groupings that are present like BRICS, SCO, etc. So we all study these aspects in this international relations. So this international relations is going to be a very interesting and a very dynamic subject to study. Now, having understood all these things, the essence of this video is to understand how are we going to master the polity and Indian constitution part of the general studies too. Now, in order to master polity and Indian constitution part, there are certain resources that has to be followed. So we will be starting with the resources one by one. If you look into any structure or if you look into any building, the stability of that building is going to start with the effective foundation that has been placed for that building. In the same manner, your preparation or your journey in mastering polity is also going to begin with a foundation. Now, what is the foundation here? It is nothing but the NCERT books. There are certain books of class 6 to class 10th which are very basic, which are also considered important. But there is a book of 11th standard called as Indian Constitution at Work, which provides a conceptual clarity and a solid base for understanding the intricacies of the Indian Constitution. So if you're someone who is going to begin your polity, who wants to master this subject, then I would recommend, or Team Metis IAS would recommend reading this book in letter and spirit to ensure that your foundation is set. Now, once this NCRT is done, then we will have to move towards a standard book. Now, what is the standard book? For the Indian polity and constitution, this book is something that is called as the Bible for UPSC preparation. This is Indian Polity by M. Lakshmikant. So here you will be learning about the basics of the Indian Constitution, the historical underpinnings, the salient features, the various constitutional bodies, the functioning of parliament, state legislature, judiciary, etc. Everything will be covered in this book called as Indian Polity by M. Lakshmikant. Now, is it enough if you study only the NCRTs and the standard book? Not at all, because Indian polity is a subject, as we know, which is very dynamic in nature. For example, recently there has been the nomination process or the election process of the vice president that is going on. So, when you study about the vice president's election process, what is important for us to understand is the current affairs that is related with this topic. Now, how are you going to read the current affairs of this? That will be through the newspapers and magazines. For example, let us take another example. Let us take the example of the Election Commission of India itself. We have to study the shortcomings of Election Commission of India. There are a lot of challenges with respect to Election Commission of India in the present days. So, if you want to study the shortcomings of the Election Commission of India, then you will not find them in your Lakshmikant. Rather, you will have to go through the newspapers and the magazines. What newspapers to read? You have two important newspapers, the Indian Express and the Hindu, which is going to provide you all these content that is required from the current affairs perspective. Now, the problem with the newspaper is that every day you will get a lot of news. So, remembering them or to making notes and then remembering them is going to be a Herculean task. So, then we have something called as the magazines that we are going to give ourselves by referring to the newspapers, making notes, and giving it to you. We ensure that it becomes easy for you to stay updated on the recent developments and their constitutional implications. We at Metis IAS provide you this magazine for the Indian polity and constitution mainly from the MAINS perspective. So these magazines is going to help you in developing the dynamic part of the Indian polity and constitution. Now, is it sufficient if you just cover your foundation and the standard book and the current affairs? Not at all. What do you need? You need something called as understanding how the UPSC's brain works. Now, when I say understanding how UPSC's brain works, what does it imply? Nothing but what kind of questions and from where UPSC is asking questions. Now, in order to understand this, you will have to go through the previous year questions asked by the UPSC in the mains examination. For that, you will have to start looking into the GS2 polity and Indian constitution questions for mains from the year 2013. Now, why 2013? Because 2013 was the year where we saw a major pattern and format change in the UPSC civil services exams. Now, these PYQs will help you in understanding the exam pattern, what kind of questions are asked, and not just that, it also helps you to identify the frequently asked themes from which area we can expect a lot of questions. And not just that, they also help you in structuring your answers effectively because you are going through the UPSC asked questions. So, by seeing these questions, you have to develop a way to answer, which includes an introduction, body, and conclusion. For all these things, the PYQ analysis is going to be a key. Now, are these enough? These are more than enough, but there are certain things, or there is a very important thing which has to be added onto it. Now, what is that very important thing? See, no matter how much you study, ultimately it is your writing that is going to fetch you marks. So, whatever you study, you should be able to reproduce them in the answer sheet. Now, how are you going to reproduce them how are you going to reproduce them in the answer sheet? Nothing but through the rigorous answer writing practice that you're going to undertake. Now, before you start your rigorous answer writing practice, what do you need? You need the topper's insights. For example, there are around 1,000 aspirants who clear the UPSC civil service examination every year. Now, when they clear the UPSC civil service examination, what it means is that their way of writing is liked by UPSC. If their way of writing is liked by UPSC, then it is something that is worth noting upon. So, what do you need to do is you need to look into the successful candidates' answer copies and see what technique they are using for their answer writing. How are they going to structure their answers? How are they going to present their answers? What way they are introducing their answers? How are they decoding a question and in what way they are concluding their answers? For all these things, you have to make sure that you are looking into the toppers answer copies. So these are some of the important things that are required to master the Indian polity and constitution part under the general studies paper. Paper 2 consists of 4 different subjects. Now, let us try to summarize what we have studied so far. So, we have studied that general studies paper 2 has 4 different parts: polity and constitution, governance, social justice, and international relations. And not just that, we have also tried to understand how we need to master polity or the essential resources that are required to master policy. So, what are the things that we require? We require the 11 standards, NCRT, Indian Constitution at work. We also need the thorough understanding of Indian polity by Lakshmikant. Then we need to be very thorough with the current affairs, for which you can use the standard newspapers like the Hindu or the Indian Express, or even you can use the current affairs magazine that is provided by Metis IAS. Along with that, you have to make sure that you are looking into the previous year questions asked by the UPSC in the mains examination for general studies paper 2. And then you need to have a rigorous answer writing practice looking into the toppers answer copies. So these are the things that you require to ensure that you're mastering polity of the general studies paper 2. So I hope this video has helped you in analyzing the Indian polity and constitution part of the general studies paper 2. Thank you.